Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this, which is the April Johannesburg branch Institute meeting and presentation. Unfortunately, it's the next virtual meeting. We still have got no clarity on when we'll be allowed to set loose again and allowed to interact and share a beer and network. But we will keep you in the loop with what we hear and when it starts to look reasonable. Today, I've got the pleasure of introducing Jeremy Clarke, an old friend of mine, both personally and professionally. I won't say how old a friend he is or how far back we go. Suffice to say that we've known each other for quite a while. Jeremy is a graduate of the Salford University in the UK in engineering metallurgy. He's a fellow of the Institute and a fellow of the UK Institute of Mining, Metals and Metallurgy. He's also a chartered engineer and a Euro engineer. He's worked extensively in the mining industry. He did his corporate career through Anglo American and De Beers, ultimately ending up as consulting metallurgist for De Beers. Then went off, did his own thing for a while, and ended up starting his own metallurgical consultancy, which ended as a part of Paradigm Project Management, which is a company he now owns and runs. Jeremy's talk this afternoon is entitled From PEA to Production. It's aimed at as a more interactive discussion. So what I'm going to suggest is that, and Jeremy has actually requested that people engage and debate. He's up for a challenge, so quite keen to debate some of the concepts that he's putting together. So if you have a comment or a point or something you'd like to debate or discuss with Jeremy, please use the bar at the bottom and raise your hand. Either myself or Kia will then give you, or I'll stop Jeremy. I'm not sure he'll be able to see it, but I'll stop him talking, and then I'll then give you the opportunity to speak, and then you can engage with Jeremy direct online. Jeremy, not sure how this is going to work. It's a voyage of discovery, this interactive thing. So let's see how we go, and I'll hand it over to you. Enjoy it.
Great, thank you. Great. Just to confirm, has everybody seen the share screen?
Yeah, got it. Thanks, Jeremy.
Great. Okay, so I'm gonna start with that. Sorry. Let's get this back. Got to just get rid of that. Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Russell. And welcome everybody. I don't quite know how many or who is online, but thanks for joining. As Russell said, this is from PEA to production, and what I'm looking at is a proven fast-track project development alternative that we're going to review today. The presentation is going to look at moving directly from a preliminary economic assessment, a PEA, into front-end engineering and design, or FEED, without the necessity for a PFS or an FS. And then we're going to look at an actual case study at the end where this was done, what benefits it had and what the problems were. And I'm sure everybody will understand there were some problems related to this. First of all, the standard model. This tends to go through a number of different iterations, about 8 processes under the normal system of exploration, drilling, sampling, evaluation, PEA, pre-feas, feasibility, front-end engineering and design, mine construction and production. And between each of those, there's obviously a decision point where you can either carry on or reverse back to any of the sort of previous parts of the process. So this is fairly standard within the industry and has been for many, many years. It has a lot of very good attributes. It gives you very good control of the project because of the number of phases and the review points that they have. It is low risk, presuming it is done correctly. It also systematically achieves an increasing understanding of the project. For each phase, you gain more knowledge and more information, and then you can either, as noted, either revert back if you don't think you've got enough or carry on. It allows for increasing levels of accuracy of the economics as you move forward. And you've got the go, no-go assessment points and the gate release points. It also allows for revisions at each phase because you can cycle back, as I've mentioned. It mainly is geared towards divergent thinking at the start. So when you're doing things like a PEA or a scoping study and specifically moving into a pre-feasibility study, you want divergent thinking. You want to think of all the options, all the possibilities, all the potential. But then you've got to hone that down into more convergent thinking and only take one solution into the feasibility study. So that allows a lot of diverse thinking up front. The methodology is also accepted by most of the major financing institutions. They like the rigor associated with this because it lowers the risk. But in some ways, the standard approach can be seen to have the following pitfalls. Some people consider it to be the only way of doing things. You must rely on it. You must only go this route, and there's no allowance for any flexibility. It can be too systematically based and can miss opportunities. Often, large companies go to large consulting companies to do their feasibility studies. Now, as we all know, in every company, there are good people and there are average people. If a large company has a lot of work on its plate, the junior company coming in to ask them to do a feasibility study will get the B team or the C team. That can often lead to the missed opportunities because they don't necessarily always look to put their best people on every project. It can't be done. Sometimes the purposes of each stage can be misunderstood. And that's linked very closely with the next bullet point, which is the project owner often tries to change the definition of each phase. We are contractors and consultants are under constant pressure by project owners to up the ante. You know, they pay for a PEA, but can we call it a pre-feasibility study? We're doing a pre-feas, but can we call it a preliminary feasibility study? A preliminary or interim feasibility study. So there's always a move by certain clients to try and push the envelope as to what each of these should be doing and what they in reality are doing. It's a very onerous process, and it's driven at the moment mainly by the financing institutions and the stock exchanges rather than project practicalities. This is mainly due to a scam which occurred in 1997 when I was living in Canada and running a listed mining company. There was a scam in Indonesia where a gold project was salted. In other words, they added gold to the assays such that they could get incorrect, very high grades from all their sampling. Overnight, when this broke, it knocked around about, I think, $300 billion off the Canadian Stock Exchange mining sector. After that, what happened was the legal and the lawyers got involved and they said, we have to stop this happening again. So they put in a very onerous methodology of running and financing feasibility studies and how you report them. Unfortunately, the reporting mechanisms are geared more towards the legal requirements and the methodology of ensuring that people cannot defraud. There is still an ability in many cases to still produce poor results and poor feasibility studies. So the focus of the feasibility studies are often moved away from the technical side to the legal side. That, as I say, creates problems. It's also very time consuming and it's very expensive when money is tight. Projects need feasibility studies to raise money. The money the companies have before the feasibility study is invariably an equity-based funding. In other words, they buy the shares in the company, and that makes it expensive for these companies to do lots of stages from PEA to pre-feas to feasibility study. And interestingly enough, if you talk to the financiers of the project, they're not really concerned about how the project owner arrived at the feasibility study, rather just the quality of the final report. That's their de facto area they go to look at, is the detail in the feasibility study. So there are problems with this approach, but it is still a good one.
I'm going to start the ball rolling.
Yep.
I'm going to stick my hand up here. And so is that right? Should the financiers of the project be concerned about how the project owner got there, or should they just be concerned with the end result? Isn't there a whole process of metallurgical test work and DD work that needs to be done to arrive at a definitive, and I use the word definitive with a small lowercase d rather than a capital D, result for the feasibility study?
Yeah, thanks, Russell. I believe that the financiers should be involved right the way through if you can bring them in early enough. And there are a lot of junior mining companies around now who do that. And you'll see the focus as this presentation moves forward is more towards the junior and mid-tier companies than the major companies. And the problems that we have with this approach will explain why that is the case. So if you can bring financiers on board early, they should be involved, because the end product is not the issue. As Russell said quite rightly, it is how you got there, how you did your sampling, how you did your review work, who you used to develop the feasibility study, in their expertise, etc. So it's not just the report that they should be looking at. They do need to know the history, I believe. But in many cases, the financiers, all they want is you dump the feasibility on their table. They go away and just crunch the numbers, and they come back with the yay or a nay without really looking at what the risks and opportunities are which have been generated through the process. So that is my opinion on that one. I don't know if that answers your question, Russell.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought I'd throw one in just to start it.
Great, thank you.
Cool.
Anybody jump in at any time? If the idea of this is, it's written. This presentation is written simply at the moment because it's a virtual presentation. I didn't want to get any video links to mess the whole thing up, but also it's written slightly contentiously. So if you don't agree with anything, please shout. The alternative approach to this is to take it from PEA right through to the production only via front-end engineering and design process. So we're knocking out two of the major time-consuming and expense issues. So that is the fundamentals of it. However, the approach is not just about removing phases. It's a fundamental rethinking of the overall process and requires a clear understanding of the risk profile. We believe that 4 major areas need specific attention. The first one is the main one. Often with the way that the standard approach works, you don't front-end load. You don't put massive amounts of experienced people in the PEA and the scoping study. You do a scoping study and it says, yeah, we can carry on with this project or not. In this case, you've got to put massive amounts of experience into that front-end loading so that you get to the right solution as quickly as you possibly can. You've got to understand what the mineral resource estimate is and how it should be used in developing the project. You've got to have good metallurgical test work done at an earlier stage probably than usual. And the other main areas, you must always focus on the business case. I'll explain that in a bit more detail as we move forward. So what this defines is that the PEA that has to be done has to be significantly better than the PEA for the standard approach. It needs more detail, more experience input, more time, and more money at this stage of the project. And I'll explain why in more detail as we go forward. Front-end loading is the
okay,
reverse.
Jeremy, you've got a question.
Yes, please.
Another old friend, Mr. Machowski, Rob.
Ah, yeah, hi.
You should be unmuted, Rob.
Hi there. Can you hear?
Rob, we can hear you.
Yes,
go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon and greetings to you all from Northern Hemisphere in Moscow here. Jeremy, just a question. So aren't we really talking about semantics? What you're calling PEA is actually a feasibility study, because a great part of all these points, including the business case, which is essential, you have to go through all those steps and then kind of you land up with the answers. So you call it a PEA, but in fact, a company and the financing institution calls it a feasibility study, which they can then sell. It's got some value, whereas PEA on its own doesn't.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Yep, it's an interesting point. I don't believe it is, and I think as I go through, Robert, you hopefully I'll explain why I think it's not the case, rather than just go into a lot of detail now. The PEA has to be much, as I said, a much higher level of PEA than it would be for the standard approach. But the issue of the mineral resource estimate I'll come to now is that it is an estimate, and people forget that. So if I may, rather than answer it directly now, can you ask that question again a bit later on when I've got a bit further through the presentation? It might assist in people. I don't want to preempt what I'm going to say and cover the whole presentation in answering your question. So I'm not avoiding it, but please bring it up again at the end and see if you think I've answered it, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Jeremy, we've got another question from or another point of view from Becca Majola.
Yep. Hi, Becca.
Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you again after a long time, and Russ.
And you, Becca.
Jeremy, just what are you proposing is the percentage design then at the PEA, not at the front end engineering? The reason I'm asking is I don't do that side of the way of client work now, but back in, say, 2005, we used to do 5% design to arrive at the bankable feasibility. And then all of a sudden, especially Canadian financiers started demanding 20-25% design. What are you going to cover that? Should I wait a little bit, or?
No, I think that's an important question now, and I can answer it now. It's not, I don't cover that in detail in this presentation just for lack of time. But yes, I hear you. These days it's 15 to 25% for feasibility study of detailed design work done. The exercise that we did and I will come to the case study at the end. We did approximately 5 to 6%. So it's more in line with that level of work. But again, this was a junior project, so we were able to modularize a lot of the work, such that if it was a diamond project, and I'll explain that. So if you wanted a dense media plant, you can get a quote very quickly from any one of 5 or 6 suppliers for a dense media plant. You can get quotes for crushing circuits, etc., very quickly and very easily. So there is no need in some areas for certain projects, and I do stress at the end of this is not a panacea. This approach, it can only be done with certain projects. Is sometimes this detailed engineering percentage is a misnomer, because you can just go out and buy the stuff. So again, I think you've got to be careful as to what do you mean by that 15 to 25% or 5% detailed design. If you've got a solid quote from a reputable company for a dense media plant, you've done 100% of the design for that part of the project. Does that answer your question to some extent?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Jeremy.
Great, thank you.
Terrific, thanks. I think carry on, Jeremy.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, so the reverse approach here is the PEA, we believe, and this is the way we worked in the example that I will bring up later, is we had a highly skilled team of consultants. So we brought in the top level guys right at the beginning of the project. And as I say, the PEA must be more detailed than the norm. You need a short and intense period of the divergent thinking, followed by rapid convergence. So you're not changing the process in this regard, you're just speeding it up, and you're using high level, highly experienced people to make that job quick, easy, and do it quickly. We always start these sort of projects with what we call an IPS, integrated planning session, where we sit around the table, well, not now, obviously, we're in the Teams meeting now, around the table, and you debate all of the major issues right up front. What sort of, debate the mineral resource and the efficacy and the accuracy of that, the sort of tonnages you think that resource can sustain, what sort of technologies you believe are relevant, and getting into things even like contract versus owner mining. And you make those sort of decisions during that integrated planning session, using the experience of all the people you've got on board. So you don't go away and do 5 or 6 iterations of owner versus contract mining. You make that decision based on the experience sitting around the table. So that is why you need to have that really experienced team at the front end of this project. And you must provide a practical and realistic solution for the project development. So you've got to say, if you've got a 5 million ton deposit, you don't mine it at 2 million tons a year, you mine it at 200,000 tons a year. So you use your practical experience to decide what is realistic for the project. The project company's team, the owners, they also must have the requisite experience. In many cases, some of these junior mining companies do not have project development experience, do not have operational experience. They need to bring it on into their company early so that they can make the decisions inside that integrated planning session. So an integrated owners team is absolutely vital. You must not, we believe, have the owners and the contractors. You've got to run as a completely integrated team, making decisions quickly and sticking to those decisions. So we always use the cliche that the project is the client. As PPM, we don't have a company as a client. We believe the project is our client, and you need to integrate fully with the actual owner to make the project work. Pragmatic thinking at the PEA level is essential. The PEA must generate a detailed project financial model, as detailed as you can make it. And I'll explain why in the next couple of points. You've got to have early decisions on the selected solution that meet the required financial hurdle rate. Now, most companies will have that, and they will say, "Oh, we need X% return on investment," depending on the rate of the net present value rate of return they want to apply. So they need to be experienced enough to understand what hurdle rate they think they can sell to their financiers, and then they've got to stick to it. And you need that detailed financial model so you can stick to it, because one of the biggest problems with project development we have is the temptation to continually optimize the project. Now, procrastination is expensive, and it increases the time to first cash flows, which is when companies start making money, and they want to make money as fast as possible. Delays are expensive. So what we've found is that you must try and avoid scope changes as much as you can. And this is going to be a contentious issue. Often scope changes are preference engineering on the part of engineers or geologists or miners, etc. And they tend to forget that if you have a 3-month delay because you're doing a review of a few options, you've delayed your cash flow for 3 months. So any decision to do a scope change or even review a potential scope change needs to be based on the detailed project financial model. And if you delay the project by 3 months and only gain a 1% improvement on efficiency, you have to ask yourself, is it worthwhile? And very few companies do that. They're too intense on, oh, we must get from 94.2% recovery of gold to 94.7. It might take us 6 months to a year longer, but that's where you've got to be. I believe that's wrong. One of the great things which we try and focus on is, and I'll go into a bit more detail on this last point later, is why not get an 85% correct solution into production fast? Make money,
Jeremy, we've got a hand.
And optimize later. Yep.
William, I'll open you. Should be able to speak.
Thank you, and Jeremy, good to see you again as well. Quick question: when you talk about sort of those incremental increases in recovery, a lot of the times the junior companies almost have to do that specifically again to gain the financing. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's all going to come down to how quickly you can get cash flow generated and lower your cost of capital. But a lot of the times they will try and get an extra 0.5% increase in recoveries because it makes it easier to get debt financing versus equity. And there's a significant number of junior companies who just can't get debt because their market caps are too low, or they don't have the robustness in their project to actually go down that route. How do you address I guess the difference between the size of the company and its access to debt versus those incremental increases which will actually add to the NPV of the project?
Right, William, that's a great question. And it actually gets the crux of where and when this approach can be used to some extent. And I do cover it a bit later on. This is generally not geared to large projects which requires large debt financing. It is generally geared nowadays to the more niche financing methods which are being used for junior companies in raising equity or mezzanine debt and all different types of systems that are current, streaming, etc. So in some ways, it's a chicken and egg situation, is that it's not for every project. And what I'm trying to produce here is something as of a discussion document that says, let's try and not let the debt funders determine how we run our company and how we generate a project. So it's a matter of trying to focus people's thinking away from the standard scenario, such that there are alternative financing opportunities. If those alternative financing opportunities are not there, this system won't work. It's as simple as that, I believe. So it is niche market at the moment, William. I think, and again, as I go through, hopefully I can cover a few more of areas that you brought up as well.
Okay, great, thanks. I might come back with something as a follow-up later. Thanks,
Jeremy.
Please
do. Yeah, please do. One of the things, sorry?
No, I was going to say, well, back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, yep. One of the things which we've also developed at PPM is something we call strategic value management, which helps in this process of, don't worry about optimization, continuous optimization for that incremental change in recovery. Most value, we believe, is expressed as a ratio of function over cost. Now, traditional value engineering, which you often do in a project after you've done your feasibility study, as you get into FEED, is you'll start to do your value engineering. And this could potentially bring maybe 5–6% benefit into the cost side of the equation. But it tends to retain the predetermined functionality. We believe that the function is a more dominant driver of value than just cost. And large cost reductions are mostly a consequence of innovative functional improvements made to the design solution. So we believe that you need to look very innovatively at what the functions are in a mine, and how they can be either removed or adapted to make large decreases in both CapEx and OpEx. And one of the overriding bases of the SVM process is it maximizes business excellence, not technical excellence. And it therefore focuses the overall project management around the financial outcomes. This again harks back to this issue of optimization and timing. If you delay cash flows, you can decrease your business excellence whilst increasing your technical excellence. So, and again, this conflicts, as William has noted, sometimes in terms of the end funder of the project. We had an example many years ago of a gold project where the client was moving more and more towards what I think is the last resort of scoundrels, which is heap leaching of gold in West Africa, because they couldn't make money on a CIP or CIL type of plant. And they were constantly trying to increase their recoveries through the heap leach. And we looked at this and they were making a very low return on investment for spending a lot of money. What they hadn't thought of was that they should decrease their average recovery from around 82%, I think it was, down to about 54. Now that seems ridiculous, but they had 54% gravity recoverable gold, which means they could completely remove any hydrometallurgy side of the business. It did not give them anywhere near the recoveries they wanted, but it made them an awful lot more money. Unfortunately, the option was rejected for the reasons William raised to some extent now, is because they've been into the market and they were looking for debt financing and they needed that 83, 84% recovery. The project was never built, and they lost a massive opportunity in that regard. So drive business excellence, not technical excellence, I think is a fundamental aspect of this approach as well. We spoke about mineral resource earlier on, and I think it was sort of Robert who mentioned it to some extent.
Jeremy, can I just, before you move on to that, can I just jump in again? You're talking to and exactly the concept that I've held for a while, and I've tried to push and also come up against exactly the same roadblocks that you have. These small West African oxide caps, put a small little modular gravity circuit in, take the money out, take the gold out, take the money out at a 50 to 55% recovery and walk away. You don't put the capital into a sovereign jurisdiction that is risky. You make your money in 2, 3, 4 years and you walk away. Why get into sulfides and all the stuff that goes with the material that sits below it?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think there are sometimes some country and reputational risks of rape and pillage issues, but the other approach to take, and I do cover that a bit later on to a slight extent, is that if you can make a lot of money in your gravity gold early on, for example, then that also gives you time and money to review the rest of the resource. You don't have to prove up 500 million tons of resource before you start making money. And that is the point of this, is the resource, the clue is in the title. It's an estimate, guys. It is not real. I did some calcs once. I think you actually start to sample 0.0000001% of your resource when you do of your ore body when you do an MRE, and sometimes it's even lower. And then we do metallurgical test work on the same very, very small samples, and we come up with 84.67% recovery. Sorry guys, it's rubbish. You're never going to get there because you don't know what you're sampling and you don't know what you've really got. So going forever and ever for greater and greater definition on a feasibility study when you've sampled such a small percentage of your resource, and that applies to every resource, not just junior mining operations, every resource, then I often think you're chasing down a rabbit hole, and you should be looking at different approaches. You must treat the estimate as for what it is, an estimate. And that is a fundamental philosophical debate, not a technical debate. And again, leads you to the business excellence route, not the technical excellence route. So there are two things which I think need to be borne in mind when you're looking at this approach all the time.
Okay, there's a couple of questions sitting in the Q&A while we've got a bit of a break. Andrew asks, would the alternative method primarily target private mining developers and/or operators, and is there a scope for it to be applicable to listed ASX, TSX, and JSE entities? I think that kind of talks to William's question as well to some extent.
Yeah. Yes, it applies to both. We have the example we did was a listed company. AIM was an AIM company. So it can be used, but it is probably geared more towards private equity funded projects. But it depends on who your shareholders are, and I do come to that a bit later on as well. So that some of the risk factors and the problems are related to that. So I'll cover that again. So it can be with both, but this is not a panacea for every project. It has to be thought through very carefully as to whether it can apply to your projects or not.
Okay, and then John Guy, would you elaborate what you mean by function in the context of SVM, which is, I think, your previous slide?
Yeah, I think William Lamb will know to some extent what some of the work we did on the Karowe project many years ago, where I've got to be careful I don't upset too many people.
I thought that was what you were trying to do.
Yeah, but I'm trying to make people think slightly differently, but not necessarily upset them. One of the things we looked at with feasibility studies have been done on projects where people get tied into the traditional methodologies, and I'm going to use a diamond example because that's where we've had most success with this approach. You know, there are flow sheets or methodologies in plant design, and again, I'm going to concentrate on process because that's where we were able to make most of the influence. Function can often be, you know, in terms of a diamond project, primary crushing, secondary crushing, high pressure grinding, roll crushing, dense media separation, recovery plant, tailings disposal, water recovery, etc. So you can look at them almost as unit processes to some extent. Now, one of the things which happened at the Karowe mine was that it was the first African mine to use autogenous milling, other than one owned by Alrosa, the Russian company, which was at Kotoka in Angola. And that had a significant, the change of that function of installing an autogenous mill removed 4 other unit processes. So it was able to significantly reduce capital expenditure and also operating costs. So that is the sort of approach to look at function is you know, how do you, in other areas, waste stripping is another area we've looked at a number of times. Large waste stripping episodes, a lot of people just go straight for lots of yellow metal running around. Maybe you've got to go for different methodologies, bucket wheel excavators, conveying the waste rather than trucking it. So you've got to start thinking what these functions are and how you can then amend those functions without actually removing the capability of the mine. The trick on SVM is see how much you can remove until you damage the functionality and then back off. Complicated, and it is entirely project specific, John. So you can't, there's no methodology for this. You just have to use that highly experienced team that you've got up front to review every functionality, and that includes you know, if you fly in, fly out, your camp, your procurement methodologies, your contracting methodologies, all those sort of things must be brought in as part of the function. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Yeah, let's press on. Thanks, Jeremy.
Good. Okay. The P2P requires a real focus on the interrogation of all technical solutions fit for purpose. I think this is a fairly standard process these days. It's becoming more and more realistic in the industry as well. And I think we just covered to some extent in what I've just been saying here is you're looking at innovative ways across all disciplines to reduce costs. So they're the functions that I was talking about. Also, one of the biggest areas of a problem for a company such as PPM is that I would say 95% of the companies you work for forget about OPEX. And that's dangerous. I understand fully, and we all understand fully, I'm sure, the constraints on CapEx to build mines. But mines don't go out of business because of CapEx. They go out of business because they're in the top quartile of OPEX. And when times are tough, you don't want to be the first one to go out of business. You want to be the last one to go out of business. So if you stay in the bottom quartile of OPEX, you're pretty sure that you're going to stay in business. So your function must be geared to minimizing OPEX as much as minimizing CapEx. This to me is one of the greatest flaws in the vast majority of feasibility studies. I've seen feasibility studies where it's all about CapEx and the OPEX is a couple of pages where they've just benchmarked issues. That is wrong. You must look in detail at your OPEX, and you must have people on your team as the owner's team, which includes the contractor and the company who have operated mines and understand how to operate them. That I find this is the biggest problem in trying to convince owners that sometimes you want to spend a bit more capex because your opex will reduce significantly, and it's a blind spot for the vast majority of companies building mines, and I think we all need to stress this even more and more. Okay, the owner's team also needs to look at the optimum contracting strategy and project execution methodology, including procurement. Again, I cover this in answering John's question. And the application of strategic value management, again, requires that experienced team. I know I'm repeating a lot of this because it is fundamental to the approach. And it, again, is fully in line with the stated need for front-end loading. So experienced team right up front. Don't put the B or C team in early because you're only doing a scoping study or PEA. In this approach, as in the standard approach, the opportunity to enhance value decreases as you move through the project development phases. So in the P2P approach, you've got to have your best options analyzed and determined in the PEA phase, not in the pre-feasibility study phase, as it would be for a standard approach. So again, front-end loading, lots of experience. Now we get to the problem areas. It has difficulties, and I'm sure you're all thinking through that, you know, this can't work for a number of reasons. You must have a mature client. The people who own the project must know what they're getting into, and they must understand what is happening and how to go about this process. And they need a very highly disciplined technical and financial team on board. They need to understand the benefits and the pitfalls of the system. The consultants team must have high levels of expertise, again, repetition. The MRE must be complete. So there was a debate earlier on from Robert about, is this semantics? You're bringing forward some of the work in terms of you do more work on your MRE to get it into the PEA rather than doing a PEA to determine whether you should do more work on your MRE. But again, MRE is always an estimate, and how much indicated and how much measured and how much inferred you need can be flexed depending on your funding mechanisms, which is what William was talking about. So this becomes an integrated approach for everything for the project development. So your MRE may not be as well defined as it would be to get your 60–70% debt funding from a standard financial institution. You may be getting equity funding with a lower status of MRE. Metallurgical test work must be complete, and I say complete enough to give you the right answers that you want to meet the functionality that you need and the efficiencies and recovery efficiencies that you want. You've also got to have a good understanding of all the geotechnical, hydrology work, etc., and be well advanced in your EIA, EMP, and all the required licenses. So what this does do, which is a negative, is it sometimes pulls costs forward a little bit, but your overall cost to production is lower, and I stress that again later on. The other pitfalls are obviously, once you're in the feed stage, it's very difficult to correct anything from the PEA. So you've got to get your PEA right. What you design in feed is what you build. So you don't do a PFS and then rework that in a FS with more design changing all the time. You make one decision, you build what you design in feed straight away. So you again take out iterations and you take out redesign processes. And probably the most problematic aspect, as we said earlier on, is the client will most likely have to self-fund the PEA and the feed. So you do get higher levels of cash outlay earlier in the project than the standard approach. However, as I said, the total cash spend to production will be much less. So there are issues. This is not a simple process, and it's not a panacea. It's not a catch-all for everybody. The other area is, oh, well, you know, if we're just doing this, we can just blunder along as we want. No. It's even more important that the tenets of reliable and accurate project management are in place. You have to do your project management probably even more stringently around change control and about design management and costs. There's a very small window of opportunity to change any decisions that you make. We use PMBOK and it works extremely well for us. So the main driver of success in this area is, as we were talking about, the shareholders and how they might have to fund up some money. The shareholders of the company have to be fully conversant with the risks and advantages. So your investor relations becomes another major issue at this point. And we were closely involved in the example that I will come to just now. We as a company were closely involved in the investor relations aspects to ensure that the shareholders and the equity funders were in place, understood what the risks were, and the experience of the team that was being put together to manage the project. This looks at a fully integrated issue of getting the project into production. So what does the client get for the risks and difficulties? It gets a lower cost of production and a shorter time to revenue generation. We like to look at it as bring an effective 85% solution into production quickly and generate your cash flows early. The alternative approach is the standard approach, and even with a good FS, research that we've done indicates that most of the work only gives you up to about a 90% effective solution in the first year or two of production. So you've spent an extra 2 or 3 years not gaining 15%, but probably about 5%. So does that make sense? In many cases, no. Rather get into production earlier at 85%, you then get to know your resource better. You can then optimize to 90 and up to 100, probably more quickly, because you've got time to do so while you're still making money, rather than trying to do that whilst you're spending money on detailed feasibility studies. Virtually no projects I've ever been involved with come on stream as planned by the feasibility study.
Okay, Jeremy, before we move on, there's a couple of comments in the Q&A from Rob and William again. We can maybe discuss them at the end and we can open the mics again, but Rob says, for now, for me, in the non-negotiables that you listed, MRE, complete, test work done, etc., we seem to have skipped over the one environmental social compliance, which is now a prerequisite for many aspects of the funding of projects, specifically greenfields. There's also, in some projects, a large amount of costly CapEx or OpEx infrastructure, which tends to be forgotten.
Robert, sorry, you're absolutely right. I didn't stress the EIA side. It is absolutely vital as well. That is done. I did mention you need to be well advanced in the PEA stage in your EIA and EMP work. But yes, it's a very valid point. It's just not included here for lack of time and to try and keep it slightly shorter.
I think William has kind of followed on with the same thing. How does permitting and social aspects play into this process? Many companies use the time to complete the FS to permit or to detail from an FS is required for permitting.
Yeah, it's the same thing. As I say, you've got it. It's not in a system that's going to work easily for jurisdictions which are complex and difficult. And I think I state right at the end, again, this is not for everybody. So it is going to have to be project specific, and you've got to review where it can be done and where it cannot be done. There will be projects where this just cannot apply. I agree 100%. Nonetheless, I think the approach can be modified to still decrease the amount of money and the time required to get into a production. So again, as I said, I'm being deliberately contentious here, and what you're raising are very valid points that need to be looked at. Robert mentioned EIA. What was his first point there as well, Russell? Sorry.
Sorry, I just got to check back here. Environmental social compliance is a prerequisite, and there's also some projects in a large amount of costly CapEx or OpEx infrastructure, which tends to be forgotten. That's it.
Yeah. So this as what part of the functionality issue is. Yes, you've got to look at the infrastructure, and you've got to look at all of those aspects. And I think I mentioned on the procurement side, how do you go about doing that work? Infrastructure, access roads, security systems, all of your corporate requirements, your stores, your financial management systems, they've all got to be part of that system, which is why, as I say, you need that large owners team on board from day one, and you need the financial people in the owners team early on as well, so you can start developing finance and admin, so you can start developing all of those requirements. But yes, infrastructure is often forgotten in projects, but it's implied here that that will be part of the system.
Okay, and then George Dallas has got a question. George, over to you.
Hi, George.
You should be, there we go, unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hi,
can hear you, George.
All right. The question I want to ask Jeremy is, in this alternate approach, is there a place for the good old-fashioned pilot plants? So what comes to mind is a pilot plant at nominal capacity, be it 50, 100 or 200 tons an hour, depending on the commodity. Fit for purpose, it gives you information while you're operating, it makes some money. And then in parallel, all the other good stuff can be done until such time as you put in the final sort of solution, fit for business, that makes money and more money. Pilot plants, that's what I'm aiming at. Does it fit in your thinking?
It's a very interesting question, because the example which I've got to now, and I think you can see the slide now, is the Tongo diamond mine in Sierra Leone, where we applied this. And I'm leaping ahead a few steps, but due to COVID, the project has been delayed, like all projects. And one of the things they've done is they've restarted the pilot plant for exactly that reason, and upgraded the pilot plant. So yes, there is potential for that to happen. I think pilot plants generally are too low level production to be economic, just because they don't have economies of scale. But what Sierra Diamonds have done is they've upped the throughput on their pilot plant, and they're treating some of their material through that now and gaining vital knowledge and making some money. So I believe, yes, there is an opportunity for that, specifically in diamond operations, which is where the pilot plant tends to be more prevalent.
Yeah, because the example that came to mind, it's not necessarily in the metallurgical field. It's actually the Sasol example, where they went into America, Lake Charles project, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And they went for a massive project, billions of dollars, overruns, CEOs fired, and all sorts of other things. Surely if they'd gone in with a smaller scale pilot operation, they would have, if not lost all that money, made some money, understood the terrain, the environment, operating in America, and then they could have come up with whatever the optimum size would have been. So it was like the bigger the doubt, the bigger the plant, and the bigger the fall. Hence my question on pilot plants. So.
Yep, no, it's a valid point. I think we'll all have our own personal opinions about that, but when you get big corporate egos, you get big corporate projects which tend to fail. And we've seen, for the last 20 years, most of the big projects have not been very successful whatsoever. And there was a time, I think, when 4 or 5 CEOs of the largest companies, diamond mining companies in the world, of the largest mining companies in the world, were all removed in 1 year because of failed projects, because egos got in the way. And I think step by step is a better approach, and that's part of the system here. Get in something small that's 85%, learn about your mineral resource as you go along, and then expand beyond that. So modularization often makes it cheaper and easier to build and quicker to build. And you can start a module at 1 million tons a year, add a second one at 2 million tons a year, add a third one at 3 million tons a year as you go along. However, it can be a nice approach, but it has the negative, and you've got to balance that off, is your OPEX goes up because you're running 3 plants instead of 1. So there's always a balance to be had between those sort of approaches. But my personal preference would certainly be for a smaller step-by-step approach, and then hit the big bang when you know an awful lot more about your mine.
Thanks very much.
Jeremy, there's a couple of comments in the Q&A, but do you want to press on?
I'm getting close to the end, so we can maybe take some more at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Okay.
Great.
Cool.
Yep. Okay. I mean, there's obviously levels of skepticism when we're hearing that here, and that's great, because is this a concept or can it be done? But we did apply it, to the Tongo mine in Sierra Leone, and it was by no means a perfect solution. There were a number of problems. We put the decline in the area we thought it was going to be, and we had to move it 3 times because each time we drilled some holes, the ground was rotten. So 3 times the portal was moved. Nonetheless, it still was started decline a year ahead of time than we expected it to. Whilst we were doing the feed, they decided to change the mining method to a slightly more mechanized approach. That did not drastically change the access design, but it did change the underground stoping design quite considerably. That was also incorporated, and by the time the decline was down to access the ore body, the new mining method was in place, but it was a hectic time, as you can imagine. The new mining method changed the top size of material to the plant and required modifications to the tipping bin and the primary crushing section. Again, was completed in time. One of the most interesting ones is that the PEA indicated 2 separate treatment plants 25 kilometers apart because there were 2 or 3 different ore bodies involved in the project, but the feed eventually realized that one central plant was more economic. So there were significant changes during the feed period, but they were all incorporated into the project eventually on time. So it can be done, but it's hard work, and you have to then use all that experience you've got to bring that to bear to make sure those things can be covered. So complicated. Small project, we could do it. Big project, you probably couldn't do it. But what did it do? Well, it basically brought the portal and decline development starting 1 year earlier, and the IRR improved by 10%. That's 10 percentage points, not by 10%. And the NPV also improved by 14 percentage points, significant numbers. So the system worked in this example and brought to the client, we believe, significant financial benefits. But as I've been saying through, it's not a panacea. It can only be used under very specific circumstances. I don't believe you can ever apply this to a large, complex project that requires significant levels of debt funding. So, William, I think that hopefully covers to some extent your comments there. However, it has been applied to small self-funding junior project. It's only viable with a clear understanding and full acceptance of the risks and opportunities. You need a very experienced team all the way through, and especially an experienced and a mature client to understand the risks and opportunities that come with this process. So that's it. So I think maybe there's some more questions.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Jeremy. Fascinating. I think I hear you, and I agree. And as somebody who's spending quite a lot of my time at the moment reviewing BFSs and then feeds and value engineering studies and that sort of thing, the backwards and forwards and the work that is repeated and done ad nauseam is actually a lot of time and money wasted. But I think, from my mind, it's certainly not a horse. It's certainly a horses for courses. It's not a panacea and can't be applied to all projects.
Indeed.
And I think as well, your comment about the project is the client is huge, and I don't think we should make light of that. I think that's actually a great way to look at it, but it also needs to be bought into by the entire project team, from owner, consultant, lender, funder, etc. That needs to be. You can't have one element or one leg of the project having that as the view, and then a different one having a different view.
Yep, and I think what I tried to cover in certain areas is that, you know, if you do go this approach, then the team is fully integrated, even up as I said, to investor relations, which is vital for this as well.
Absolutely.
So you can only do it with one fully integrated team. You cannot have departments running separately in this regard.
No, fair enough. Okay, moving to the comments and the questions. Ed Legg says, I suggest that a full stress test and risk assessment must be completed to ensure the detailed designs prior to project execution are complete. he's had projects where later modifications are very costly.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously in this presentation, I can't cover everything, but the PMBOK methodology has to be used in terms of project management, and that includes all the usual risk assessments, HAZOPs, etc. But don't forget opportunities. People stress, oh, we must have a risk assessment. People forget to do an opportunities assessment as well.
Absolutely.
So you need to do both. But yes, all of the standard project execution planning and methodologies must apply. In fact, as I think I tried to stress, potentially even more rigorously.
Yeah. Okay, Mark Button, is it becoming more difficult to source highly experienced consulting and operating teams, particularly at the study level?
That's an interesting question. It isn't yet. We are not experiencing that at the moment, but we're all getting older, and we've all got lots of grey hair or white hair. So it is starting to happen. And I think what I do find is if we're asked to work with some of the larger project houses, a lot, where they often have prescribed retirement periods and ages, they are certainly experiencing it. But the way we work is we work with associates, so we don't have any employees. PPM has 0 employees. We don't have premises. Our overheads are low, and hence our rates are low, and we're very busy. So we work on the basis of associates, so we are able to bring in experts for each project as and when they are required. So we don't have a metallurgist who must work on copper or gold or rare earths or vanadium. We'll bring in a rare earths expert, or we'll bring in a platinum expert as required. We have not yet found that difficult, but it will do, I think, in the very near future, for companies such as us. I think the big boys are already finding it.
Yeah, and I can confirm that. I mean, from our side, we're very small. We're certainly not one of the big boys, but we're already starting to see it as well. And we're not in the front end of it as you are.
Yeah.
Okay. The next 2 questions or comments have come from Rob Markowski again, and Becca also wants to comment again. So I'm actually going to unmute Rob first, and to let him ask his questions and make his comments.
Okay. Can you hear
Rob,
me?
there you go.
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Robert.
Jeremy, certainly thank you very much for an interesting presentation, and I think in your conclusion you've succinctly made the statements which in many cases I'd consider to be a disclaimer, but well done. I think it's great methodology and certainly applicable to some projects. My challenge to you and the audience perhaps is just to think about a slightly different approach. If I think about, I'd go straight from PEA to execution to feed. I'd rather have a straight away starting with a feasibility. So I mean, I go back to the point I tried to make at the beginning, is that for some companies, typically feasibility studies or work done and databases that they've accumulated by doing all the test work, etc., on the project, hold a value, and there is a monetary value attached to it. PEAs are PEAs in general. So to a non-specialist person, if you use the word feasibility, it holds even some intrinsic value in itself, and there's a certain perception around it. So why not in your process replace the PEA and go straight into feasibility? Just a thought.
Yeah. I hear you, Robert, and that we did look at that on a couple of occasions. We didn't do it in the example that I quoted, but we are doing that on another project which I can't really talk about to some extent. Exactly that approach. So it is, again, as Russell said, it's horses for courses. So I think what is hopefully all I've done here is said to people, look, there are alternatives to the standard approach. And I think as project managers, we should be trying to change some of the perceptions that are out there. And I agree 100% that there are perceptions regarding PEA, PFS and FS. And just look at alternative methodologies, I think is what I'm trying to stress here as much as anything else. You know, perceptions I believe need changing, and the term feasibility study is one of those things. Maybe what we're suggesting here is the PEA becomes more of a PFS in that regard, and it is halfway between those two. All those sort of things and levels are possible, I believe. I think the only thing I can say based on my experience is you just have to properly define what the report is that you are trying to generate at any specific time in the process, and what the purpose of that report is. I think it's very important to do that rather than just have a name. You know, we've got feasibility study, we've got bankable feasibility study, we've got definitive feasibility study. I mean, what do they mean? Nobody knows. It's just a terminology that people like to use. A bankable feasibility study is only bankable if you raise the money. If you haven't raised the money, it wasn't bankable. So I believe it's perception, but just try and define very clearly what your process is and what the raison d'etre for each aspect of that process should be.
Okay, thanks for that, Rob. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, I'm going to unmute Becca next. Becca, over to you again, buddy.
I'm here, Russ, thanks. Jeremy, thank you. Good presentation, and I'm glad I attended this, hearing voices and seeing people like Rob and William again. Jeremy, I'm just worried that this is maybe not project specific, but company specific, right? So if it requires, for instance, a good team in the owner's team, many of the junior miners don't have a good team. They have the entrepreneur and no one else behind them, and they're very reliant on consultants and people who do this work. And it sounds like it encourages you to spend a lot of money upfront on faith. And let me contextualize that. PEA for me is the scoping study, right? And maybe you can just comment if we're in the same place. But when I used to do this work for the people I did it for, it was junior miners. So the scoping study for us was, should we spend more money in the work that requires us to get to pre-feasibility study? And at pre-feasibility, we often decided that the project was going ahead, but we did the pre-feasibility before we did geotech work, right? And if I have to start doing geotech work and EIA to an advanced level for a PEA, I'm spending a lot of money on faith, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's a very valid point, Becca, indeed. If I can answer that in two phases, I think your first point is very valid, is junior companies often don't have the integrated experienced team, which is why I stressed it again and again in this presentation. What we have done in examples such as this is we've assisted the company by effectively becoming integral owners representatives with the company. So you become integrated with that company, and it is a massive amount of trust. It needs a massive amount of trust. And I'll repeat that, and you're absolutely right. So you have to know your client, and the client has to know you as a consultant. And basically, you know, from a PPM perspective, you know, all of the work we do these days is virtually all repeat work. So we've worked with all these companies for a long time. I think PPM's advertised once in its life, in its 16-year life, and we got no work from that. All our work comes from word of mouth or repeat work. So it's a process that you build up over a period of time with the companies that you deal with. So you need to integrate the consultants team with the owners team to generate that depth of knowledge within the team. And hence the comment, as Russell said, you know, agreed, you know, the project is the client's, not not the company per se. The second thing is, you're right. Again, I did stress that you are spending more money up front, but hopefully less money to get into production. But it is higher risk money, and that's a very valid point. So again, when you're looking at what businesses and what opportunities and projects you could apply this to, they have to be pretty reliable and pretty robust projects, because you've got to have an understanding at the early PEA, which is similar to scoping study. PEA came out of Canada with the NI 43101 amendments after BRIEX. That became the new terminology there. So we tend to use that more now. So you do need to have more faith in your project. So it's got to be a pretty good one. And you've got to have a solid team, again, looking at it early on to say, you know, our experience says with these parameters, even at an early stage, this project looks very viable. So again, it's not for every project, Becca. So your comments are entirely valid. And every step of the way, you need to review all those. So you've got to have a high expectation and understanding of your project before you start spending that money. But all those risks are correct. You do spend it earlier, but the benefits are there. You get a better return on investment for your shareholders when it works.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's good.
Okay, thanks, Becca. William, back to you.
Thanks, and Jeremy, again, thanks a lot. I'm a huge fan of what you're actually proposing here, and I sit on a couple of junior boards, and I think the only reason why I'm on those boards is because I'm not an exploration geologist, and they're looking for a bit of a voice of reason in terms of where can we actually go and what boxes do we need to check. But the one thing that, and I think you've stressed this in the way you answered Becca's question, is, to me, it comes down to, number one, the strength of that owner's team that is really going to be guiding the solution, but it's their ability to take ownership for what they're actually proposing.
Yes.
And we learned this from the De Beers days, is sort of front end load, get the people on board, because when you start commissioning, if things go wrong, they're less likely to point a finger at the EPCM contractor because they were part of the solution. And to me, that's one of the critical components of a successful project. If things start to go wrong, the owner's team is more incentivized to work on a solution to get everything back on track. And then one other comment, and maybe, Jeremy, this is a question for you as well. When you look at 43101, and I cannot tell you how many 43101 documents I've read, and they're rubbish. They are actually, to me, a 43101 is now an excuse for a junior company to say we have a feasibility, but they have a technical feasibility study and not a feasibility study per se. So they don't have that level of detailed engineering to back up what is now in their 43101. And that's why projects are going awry, because they are not getting to the level of detail and Becca, you brought it up, the level of engineering which is completed to a feasibility level standard to support the cost estimate. So they come out with a number. There's a lot of feasibility, or 43101 feasibility studies are now factored, and that's a very, very dangerous path to go down, versus what you're talking about is the level of detailed engineering that has already gone into a modular plant is so much higher. Therefore, the accuracy of your cost estimate and the timeline to actually get that thing to site, because it's being constructed off-site, is so much better. So comment and question.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. 43101 to me is many cases is a legal tick boxing exercise, and that's it. And a lot of the solutions that come out are not very good. You know, I don't believe any feasibility study can ever be factored. That's a more of a PEA stroke PFS in the standard approach, that point of view. So I would agree 100% with that, William. And I think the way forward is, well, I don't know. I mean, we don't use it in 43101 much more. It's more JORC and SAMREC at the moment, the stuff that we're working with at the moment. So, but I would tend to agree with you in that, in your approach, in your comments. I think there are problems afoot, which is why hopefully stimulating concepts is to look at new ideas and look at new methodologies.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, everyone.
Well, thanks, William. Thanks for your comments.
Terrific. Thanks, William. There's a couple more questions in the Q&A at the moment, Jeremy.
Sure.
Thomas Gluck, can having detailed financial and process models available early in the process, are they key must-haves?
So financial and what? So it was the
Process
first?
and process models.
I think the financial model in many cases is vital, yes, because as I say, what people tend to forget is that this continuous optimization and continuous change costs you money, and unless you put that in to the financial model, and which is what we do, if somebody comes with a change of scope and it's going to take 3 months and a 1%, 0.1% improvement in recovery, put that in the model, and 99% of the time it says don't do it because it doesn't make money for the company. So you've got to have that fairly robust, doesn't have to be absolutely necessarily fully detailed financial model, but a very robust one that reflects the actuality of the project. Similar for technical. The more technical information you get, the better, but you develop that during the PEA as you do the financial model. So the two to me go hand in hand. The earlier you get everybody in to these projects from all disciplines, the better. As far as I'm concerned. So yes, integrating geology, metallurgy, geometallurgy links, with finance links, all as early as possible. I mean, we had a platinum project some time ago that some drill holes went down. There was no mining guy around. So how do they actually determine what the grade of the deposit is when you've got 4 layers of platinum with partings? Because nobody asked, how are you going to mine this? So you can get all the geological information you need, but you don't know how to assess it unless you've got a mining guy there saying, actually, you can't mine it that way. You have to mine it this way. So that determines your resource. So because you can't give a factor or a figure for a grade of what you're going to mine unless you know how you're going to mine it. So you need integrated thinking from day one. The first drill hole goes down, you should have a mining guy, an accountant, a metallurgist, and a geologist on your team. I believe, not permanently, not all the time, but they should be involved with that first drill hole.
Agreed. Okay, and then the other comment now is from Mark Cresswell. Thank you for a most interesting presentation. I was part of a tin project where the client's tin expert said, just give me the tools in the gravity circuit, shaking tables, spirals, cyclones, etc., and I'll optimize them during commissioning. It meant we never finalized the overall mass balance to the last cubic meter, but the approach worked and saved significant pilot plant study time and costs. The key, though, was his experience in tin processing, which is quite specialized.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Good to hear from you again. I think hopefully what you said has vindicated some of my aspects. I would agree 100% with that. Again, why did it work? Experience. And that all comes down to that, is you've got to use the right people on your project, I believe.
Yeah.
But great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for that vote of confidence to some extent.
Terrific. Well, Jeremy, that is it from the feedback and the input side. I have to say, this has gone 1 hour and 20 odd minutes so far, which is the longest that I've been on one of these. So you've certainly evoked some discussion and some thought, which was, I guess, what your intention was up front. So job done. Great.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity. And thanks everybody for participating and giving me those difficult questions.
Yeah, well, thank you on behalf of the branch and the committee and from all the attendees. Jeremy, thank you. We will ensure that your participation and presentation is recognized in the normal format. So thank you for that. And just remains to say thank you to everyone else for attending, and hopefully see you at the next meeting, and hopefully it's just as entertaining and thought-provoking.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Terrific. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.